Welcome to the final webinar in our series on building the supply of high-quality childcare in high-needs areas. We really appreciate your joining us for this series and so glad you could join us today to talk about models to build, expand, and sustain quality facilities and services in high-need communities. I am Jen Bender with the Build Initiative. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few logistics. Due to the large size of this webinar, all participants are in listen-only mode. We hope it will not limit the interactive nature of this webinar, so we encourage you to put your comments and questions in the chat box. We want to hear from you as part of this discussion. You are all experts as well in terms of what has worked and not worked for you, so please do share your own experience via the chat box. On our last webinar, we had a great dialogue not only between the participants and the speakers, but also among the participants themselves, so let's keep that going today. Now I want to turn it over to Zelda Boyd, Senior Technical Assistance Specialist with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance. Zelda, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zelda Boyd with the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance. And you've met Jen, and also with us today, Deb Mathias with the Build Initiative will be facilitating a portion of today's webinar. So once again, as in previous sessions, I'd like to take just a moment to tell you a bit about the National Center on Early Childhood Quality Assurance and share with you our work and our focus and what we have available in terms of services. So the Quality Assurance Center is jointly funded by the Office of Child Care and the Office of Head Start and Maternal and Child Health. Our priorities are to advance strong quality standards and licensing regulations. We also focus on supporting the development and enhancement of state quality initiatives and building the capacity for quality assurance systems. So our contact information is listed at the end of this presentation, and as always, we do invite you to reach out to us if you have any TA needs in these particular areas. So just as a reminder, as Jen has indicated, today is the last webinar in our series of 5. This slide will show you that you can get to individual recordings, and all of these recordings, including today's recording, will be on the webinar and will be posted for future viewing, and that will remain on the webinar, on the webinar website indefinitely. And then along with the recordings, we do have all of the materials that have been shared in the webinar series that you can also access, and that will be posted at the link on this website. Now I'm really pleased to welcome our panelists today. We have 4 individuals that have a wealth of knowledge and experience building the capacity of early learning in their own communities. So we have with us Natalie Brake, and she is the Director of Capacity Building at Early Learning Indiana. Bevan Parker Shurkaz is the Senior Director of Early Childhood Education at Reinvestment Fund. And then Monica is also part of the panelists, and she is the Director of Early Childhood Services at IFS. Natalie Renew is the Senior Managing Director of Education and Family Services at Public Health Management Corporation, and she will be actually leading the team today and starting the conversation. So I'm going to just remind everyone, as Jen indicated, please use the chat box to interact with our panelists, to share information, innovative activities that are going on in your own states or local areas, ask any questions, and we will be fielding those questions, and the panelists will be fielding those questions as we go along in the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Natalie Renew and hear from our speakers so that they can share with us what creative things that they are doing with their resources to build the capacity of care in their high-need areas. So Natalie?
Thank you, Zelda. On behalf of the other panelists, we're really thrilled to spend this afternoon with you talking about innovative ways to expand the supply of high-quality early learning services. This afternoon, our discussion will focus on, we'll have some activities and get everybody working, and then we'll discuss 3 models from Philadelphia, Indiana, and Detroit, focus on expanding supply. We'll talk a little bit about the history of these programs and the elements of the programs and what makes them successful. We will talk more with you about opportunities in your own communities and sort of ways in which you might frame opportunities to expand the supply of high-quality early learning. We'll talk in depth about how collaboration has been really critical to the success of these initiatives and how important it is for alignment of different programs across different areas. We'll talk about program impacts and how supply building initiatives have impact on early learning providers and young children. And then we'll talk a little bit about both policy opportunities that are on the horizon, as well as some resources from our initiatives that may be helpful to you and your community, and then hopefully have some time for questions and answers. So we're going to dive right in and ask you to help us brainstorm and think a little bit about what's going on in your community. And as you reflect on your region and locality, if you could think about answering these 3 questions, please enter your response into the chat area and use the question number 1, 2, or 3 as you respond. So, number 1. How are you assessing facility quality in your community? Do you have established, shared, or written criteria? How are you thinking about what high-quality facilities look like in your community? Question number 2, what frameworks exist to guide quality improvement? So in addition to licensing, are there specific frameworks in your communities that are guiding facility improvements, facility expansion? And then question number 3, how in your community or your locality do you prioritize these improvements? What comes first, and how as a community are you thinking about the prioritization of investment in supply building? So we're going to give folks a second to enter their responses into the chat box. Again, use the number of the question as you respond so that we can sort out, the responses that we're seeing and take some time to reflect on what folks are sharing. So we're just giving folks a couple more minutes here to enter responses. How are you assessing facility quality in your community? We're talking really specifically about the bricks and mortar of facilities in this question. Are there specific frameworks that you're using to determine or to guide facility improvements or expansion? And how are you prioritizing investments around these improvements in your community? Great. So it looks like we're getting a number of responses, and it looks like there's a fair distribution of folks that are using sort of some common tools like CLASS and ERS and PASS and others, as well as some individualized tools like self-assessments or surveys that may be developed locally. As we think about, how the context in which we build supply, we really start thinking about what's already in, the landscape and what we can leverage, and thinking about whether the QRIS serves as a proxy for facility quality. And I think that really depends on the QRIS, but are there explicit facility requirements within the QRIS? Are they located within the licensing regulations or elsewhere? If your QRIS uses a tool like ERS, then there may be some real specific facility items that come out of that. And one of the considerations that our programs really considered is ensuring that there was a common understanding of quality. In Philadelphia, QRIS was really leveraged as that common understanding in terms of Keystone Stars, our QRIS. But it also offered us opportunities in terms of understanding what data existed around facilities already. And that's been true of several localities that Bevan and I have worked in, that we've been able to leverage the QRIS to understand data around facilities. And also to help us really gain a deeper understanding of the administrative capacity of operators. We know that expanding facilities requires a great deal of administrative capacity in terms of managing bids and subcontractors, and the administrative capacity of the operator is really a key concern for us. We also really thought about whether or not there was shared understanding of what facility quality looked like, and we know that NAYC and Head Start have really developed some tools around articulating what facility quality looks like. And for those of us facilitating this conversation, we've done additional work in our local communities to think about what locally developed tools look like, and we're going to share some of those resources towards the end of the discussion today. And then also how we prioritize. So as we start to think about expanding and improving facilities, really thinking about life and safety measures, health and safety first, then sort of moving toward regulatory compliance and operational needs, and then on to really that high quality, how do we assure that children and families are thriving in the facility. And there are a number of factors to sort of think about as we reflect on those pieces, recognizing, I think in particular, that most of us are working across a variety of settings, so family child care, school district buildings, private child care, community-based settings. We're also working in communities where the age and condition of buildings is really varied. So how do we sort of either articulate or coalesce communities around a shared understanding of what high quality looks like? And these are really questions for the panelists that we started to think about in designing our supply building initiative.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. So now we're going to take some time to go in and talk through each of the programs that we're operating. We have 4 organizations representing kind of 3 programs and 3 locations. Natalie Renew and myself, Bevan Parker-Churkes. We are in Philadelphia with the Fund for Quality. We have Monica Duncan representing Detroit, and Natalie Brake for Indiana. So as you're here today to talk through supply building programs and strategies that we employ, we think we also represent a good combination and mix of kind of different types of programs in terms of length of operation. Some of us are longer running, others are just completing kind of pilot phases. And then we also kind of all vary in terms of our focus on different geographic locations. Some are community-based strategies, others citywide, and some statewide. So we've formatted this so that each of us will kind of run through each section and start with Philadelphia, then move to Indiana, and then Detroit. So you'll hear from a lot of people at a lot of different times. Hopefully it won't be terribly confusing. So just a little bit about us. As I said, I'm Bevan Parker-Churkes from the Reinvestment Fund. I'm here with Natalie Renew, and she's with PHMC. Collectively, we represent the Fund for Quality, which is a partnership between our 2 organizations. It was really built on the strength of what each organization of ours does and represents. PHMC is our local QRIS administrator here in southeastern Pennsylvania, and Reinvestment Fund is a community development financial institution which has a long history of facility-based financing. along with a lot of technical assistance around kind of business and project-related practices. Since 2014, we've worked in partnership to run the Fund for Quality, which supports the capacity of existing high-quality operators so that they can expand to serve more low-income children across Philadelphia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Brake, Early Learning Indiana. Our mission at Early Learning Indiana is to ensure the highest level of early care and education for children in the state. So we are a statewide organization. A couple of things to note with us is, with us being a statewide organization, we are one of the oldest early childhood education nonprofits in the state. We are providers at the same time as we are a statewide support. So we operate 10 of our own high-quality centers. We support the state's Office of Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning's Child Care Resource and Referral System through 9 local child care resource and referrals, and we provide training and TA to those resource and referrals. And then we are very big on advocacy and leadership within our state. We want to help make sure that the statewide systems are empowered to be able to provide that highest level of early care and education for everyone in Indiana. So we do a little bit of everything from in the classroom all the way up through advocacy on statewide level.
And IFF, just like our other partners, are CFDI. You know, we focus a lot on a couple of buckets of work. So lending and finance, we call that our CAPSAW department, and it's really focused on how we can help partners in our community if they need supplemental dollars to do their work with excellence. And then with our real estate services department, it's from locating where it might be identified in terms of all the way through the development of it. Now, what we use for our research, it really just helps us have data-informed strategies about how we do our work, but also it helps us to learn more about the culture of that environment, the people of that environment, so that we can have their voice throughout the process. And we use all this information, hopefully, to really guide advocacy and public policy messaging, because we know in early childhood there are several challenges related to payment that the providers, they work so hard but are not paid enough. Parents are not getting extended and full daycare. And so we use all these things to hopefully make dynamic changes in the communities that we serve. This year we are happy and excited to say we are celebrating 30 years of service, and we are focused completely on the Midwest. We serve 8 states, but we have 5 offices.
Thanks, Monica. So now we're going to take a step back and kind of talk about the inception of these programs to give you a sense of context, help you kind of understand where everyone came from. So first with Philadelphia, really a lot of the bulk of our work is funded by a local philanthropy group called the William Penn Foundation, and it was really they were the ones that kind of got us focused and started on this work. They were kind of taking care to reprioritize some strategies and think through where they really wanted to make a larger impact. Great learning came to the surface, and that's really covering that early learning phase and stage of work. And so before they really delved into that portfolio, they wanted to have a better sense of the landscape. And so they came to us, and we actually have similar to IFF, we have a research department called Policy Solutions. And they came to our Policy Solutions group and said, before we really make any decisions on investments, we want to better understand the landscape. And from there came what we call the Child Care Map, which is an interactive online tool which takes a look at the supply, demand, and gaps of child care across the city of Philadelphia. So you can go to childcaremap.org, and it really drills down to the census block group, showing you where there's a need for care, be it just kind of general care. You can also layer into information around high-quality care, so then you can start to see how the gaps start to spread, right? We know there's kind of a gap in care everywhere. there's definitely an overarching gap in high-quality care. And then because we want to develop and drive resources to areas that need it most, this map is crucial and critical in helping us drive that investment. So as I mentioned, kind of subsidies are scarce in this sector. This allows us to target communities that need it most, and then we are able to actually layer on demographic information to help us make those decisions. So we can layer on information around income, language, and again, we're down to the census block group, so we can really target specific communities and populations. We piloted this work kind of upon completion of the map, which was in 2014, and then we were recapitalized in 2016 and are on our second round. So to date, we have over $23 million in grant funds. As a community development financial institution, Reinvestment Fund is unique in that we can contribute our own loan fund dollars. So we've actually underwritten some loans to some of these projects that exceed the grant maximums, and then actually leverage kind of the grant funding, which is great. And we are tasked between the pilot program and our second round with creating 2,400 new high-quality seats in Philadelphia over the 7-year project period.
So with our capacity building grants at Early Learning Indiana, we started them around the same time as Philadelphia was starting. In 2014, we were gifted a $20 million grant from the Lilly Endowment, so private funding that came into our state of philanthropy funding. And it supports 5 goals that we are looking at accomplishing within our state that are all related to the quality and the capacity of early child care. Specifically looking at for the goal around capacity building, we set out to create 1,000 new high-quality seats. In that definition, we looked at those new seats knowing that we would have programs who were not considered recognized high quality within our state, and we would count those programs that advanced in quality, but we'd only count if they were completely new seats. So if you already had 3 classrooms and that advanced in quality, we would count it for a quality advancement, but the new seats had to come from completely new rooms. So knowing that there was the likelihood of construction in order to do those new rooms. As part of the funding sources also going into our project, we looked at the coaching supports that are offered through our FSSA and really looked at, because we were taking a statewide approach, the travel demands, as well as the fact that some of these providers that we could potentially be granting were about 150 miles apart, how we were going to do some of those supports and really tapping into our local systems that already existed that were within their backyard to be able to support them in their movements and their construction. So as we did the designs, we've done single payment grants, which range from $2,000 to $100,000 to add their new seats. The variation in the range really was dependent on what the individual needs of the providers were. As we went through multiple rounds of funding, we realized that there were some people who didn't understand fully what some of their needs were, and so they needed a lot of preparation work from their child care resource and referral or from us to go through the standards and to see what they would need, especially when we looked at capital funding for changes to their buildings, to decide what they would need to ask for. When we were looking at the project design, we divided our budget categories up into 5 areas that all addressed components of our QRIS system in Indiana, our path to quality. So those could possibly include the facility improvements, which we are one of the few grants that does the facility improvements. That's something that we found that a lot of providers were having more difficulty to fund. They could also do professional development for staff that is linked directly to the education requirements for our QRIS system. Classroom materials, then curricula supports, because it is one of the requirements from QRIS for us to have curriculum at a certain level. And then family engagement, as that is a big push in our state for how our providers are engaging with family. So knowing that providers may need to request funds for all 5 categories or only one category, we left it very open as to what they could request so that we could make sure to hit their needs.
So for IFF, we have only been in the city of Detroit since 2014. And we were brought into the city to do research studies, specifically a supply and demand study for early childhood. And we did this one for the city of Detroit in 2015. And what we learned were several things, but there are three that are in bold that I just really want to highlight the most. So one was based on what we learned from the community and what was visible, we really needed to create some examples, tangible examples of what quality looks like, quality that is aligned in programmatic quality and facility quality. We really needed to ensure that even if we had a beautiful facility, that what was happening on the inside was quality for children. And so we needed as many providers across the city to participate in our Great Start to Quality rating system because the movement in that was not moving as quickly as we wanted, but it's really progressing far more now. The other is that so if we create 3 beautiful new facilities, that really puts a minor dent in what's really needed. What we should be doing also is investing in providers who've been doing this work a long time, fighting and scrapping, but they also have difficulty in saving money, and facilities is kind of the last thing they think about investing in. So we really need to figure out a facility program for them to help them grow. And then the next thing we did is we had another study, which is a tri-county study. And that study said a couple of things too. One is that we need to expand capacity in high needs area, meaning more people to serve more kids. Also facilities really bubbled up a lot. And then the other thing is we really need to be sensitive that when we do our work, that we develop it and target it and design it specific to that community. When we did the Detroit study, we learned that there was over 27,000 children who did not have a space to go for care. For our Tri-County study, we found out that there were over 68,000 children who needed care. And so what I want to share about that is the next slide shows you kind of the mitt of Michigan. And so that red area is where now we're targeting our work. And so based on these studies, what happened was we had the philanthropic community say, how can we make things happen? And so we started things off, and we've been doing it since 2016. So we're only 2 years old. We're kind of toddlers in this. And we did a lot of learning. So the first was that our investments were started off at from $5,000 to $15,000, and then we realized, it's totally not enough. So then we increased it the next time to 20, because what would happen is if we help someone with their roof, you know what happens with a roof. It impacts the walls and the floors, and so we felt we were leaving it incomplete, and we needed to have more money. And so now we're at kind of our third pass at it, and we've increased it to $50,000. So clearly we're learning and doing it better and better, hopefully, as we go along, and really using the providers to help inform the process. And so a little bit more later, I'll share with you more about who the partners are and what the programmatic pieces look like.
So now we're going to delve into some of the more unique details of each of our program designs. And again, starting with Philadelphia, as I mentioned earlier, the program really is a supply-side strategy focused on the already existing high-quality providers, so folks that we know or we think are doing something right, and then working with them to build capacity and be able to replicate services to serve more low-income children.
So in Philadelphia, we select participants based on their participation in QRIS, as well as a really extensive look at their organizational capacity and an assessment of their commitment to serving low-income families and vulnerable populations, and an assessment of their capacity to expand and sustain the initiative. And then our design is that programs that are selected, that they both meet the eligibility criteria and have a feasible project in mind, go into what we call a guided planning period. Guided planning is a requirement of providers in order to access capital dollars within the Fund for Quality. And guided planning really has 2 key components. One is pre-development, so really ensuring that the project itself is ready to break ground once capital dollars are deployed. architects, legal, engineers, whatever is needed for the facility itself. But then also what we call kind of organizational planning, which really looks at the structure of the organization and the needs of that organization to be successful in the expansion, but also to sustain the expansion. So we deploy a group of consultants to each program to assess sort of their organizational capacity, the strengths of their strategic plan, their business systems, their technology infrastructure, all of the business components that assure us that once this program is built and developed, that the program will be successful in its operations. And really kind of looking at the impacts of to the program. For example, a site that may only be a single site operator who is going to add a new branch of its organization, what middle management infrastructure do they need? Do they need to start outsourcing their accounting functions? Really helping the organizations think through those key aspects of organizational planning so that we know when programs successfully complete the guided planning and enter into the capital phase, we are confident, firstly, that the project will get built and will be successful in getting done, but also that the operator will be successful in expanding their operations and sustaining those expanded operations.
So upon, thinking about the project side of the work, as Natalie mentioned, we have this guided planning phase, and that really helps folks unpack and start to understand what the project means. So again, we are proposing a slot increase, so there has to be a net seat creation involved in the project. What we do is we work with the providers to either expand in their existing location, start a brand new center entirely, or work in coordination and support with a community partner. We also have available during that planning phase that Natalie just discussed a lot of project vetting support. So we work on developing project budgets. There's grant dollars available for reimbursement for pre-development expenses, which we know can get pretty costly pretty quickly. We coordinate and work with folks on recommending architects, environmental analysis, engineers, all sorts of things. I mean, these, again, the types of facilities that we're working with and organizations we're working with run the gamut from an existing kind of small center to a multi-site, multi-service organization. So their needs around both organizational planning and project planning really differ. If this is we also are trying to be cognizant of the fact that if this is a small little center and they're only going to expand once, we don't really necessarily need to teach them all the ins and the outs of facility planning because they're only going to do this once, right? But if this is somebody that we think is going to replicate over and over, we do try and institute some capacity building around the project development piece. Again, completely dependent on and kind of developed on a case-by-case basis. But in any event, they have the pre-development grants. And essentially, the project gets really baked through that planning phase up until we kind of say, you end planning when the next day you could kind of pull permits and start the work. And so then we enter people into this capital grant phase, which are grant dollars of up to $300,000 to complete an expansion project. We're very careful not to over-subsidize, but we're also very careful to ensure that things like the building envelope, like Monica mentioned, that roof gets fixed so that we are ensuring the investment that we're making into the program is good and solid and is around for the foreseeable future. The projects do really run the spectrum of size, cost, and length of time. So again, it could go from an existing center with an underutilized space. Say they had, in our first round, we had somebody who had a boardroom that just wasn't used, and that literally just got converted into a preschool classroom by adding some elements such as sink and bathroom access, and then also just furnished the interior of that classroom. That goes from there all the way to a 200 capacity, brand new center, which was converting an old shoe store into a 2-floor early child care center. So While the grants do max out at the $300,000, we also have the support to try and develop and troubleshoot around gap financing. So sometimes there's a pause button that we hit to try and develop out the entire sources for the project itself. So maybe that's some fundraising or grant writing. It could be down the loan avenue. There's also some other resources that grant resources that are available in Philadelphia for folks. So we try and coordinate and connect them to other resources to ensure that the project is fully funded in order for us to proceed with the work.
And I just wanted to let everybody on the webinar know that towards the end of the presentation, we will share with you a number of resources and direct you to websites where you can get many of the tools and assessment, capacity assessment tools that we're discussing now. So we will direct you to those resources toward the end of the presentation.
Okay, so for our grants for Early Learning Indiana, as I said previously, we required that any of the expansion would be linked to our state's QRIS system. So knowing that we had applicants who would be starting from all different places, the requests that we got were really all across the board. And I like the way they said it in Philadelphia. I mean, we had the difference between a school that just had that open classroom space that could be reallocated to the early learning, to a lot of ministries that when they were built, they were not built in mind to have early childhood, which means that they did not have adequate lighting or restrooms that were accessible. My favorite is the small-sized toilets or those kind of things. So we would have some who used a lot of their funds in the construction area in order for them to be up to code in order to progress on our QRIS system, where we had others that were mostly requesting items that were material-based or curriculum-based. We wanted to make sure, because we do support a mixed delivery system in Indiana, that through our actions with the capacity building grants, we were supporting that mixed delivery system. We did have a stipulation by our funding source that we could only grant capital funding to nonprofits. So that did eliminate a lot of our family child care in our system. And so we looked at the overall funds that we got, how we could support family child care in other ways, if not with our capacity building grants. And so our $20 million pot got divided up into smaller pieces, and we looked at about $2 to $3 million would be going directly towards these capacity building grants to add on those new seats. We also looked, if we were going to support our state's mixed delivery system, at how we were approaching centers, ministries, and schools in their individual needs. And that led to a lot of the differences in requests for education components for staff across the different providers. One of the things that we did not do at the beginning of our grants, and we definitely learned from and then applied as we continue to do rounds, was to hold on-site consultations prior to having all of our applicants submit their final scope of work, their final project plans. Realizing that some of our providers, it was not really their wheelhouse to know necessarily all of the standards and all of the pieces that they need. And what we ended up happening is we granted somebody, and then they may not realize that they don't have the right fire system for the type of provider they are. We get into the project, and they can't go any further. So holding those on-site consultations allowed for our staff and those local child care resource and referral staff, as well as in some instances community foundation members or local United Way or other supports, to be there and to discuss what the expansion plan is, and then to really be able to get into the details of what would work for a location or not. It also helped us to eliminate some applicants who, while they had great passion, they were really just in the wrong spot, where for the investment that would be needed to take that building where it needed to go in order to safely house a high-quality child care was too large of an investment, and we could recommend that they look for a different location if possible. So it really helped to have those on-site pieces. It also helped our staff learn more about what we were looking for and to be able to make additional suggestions. And that related in a lot to our additional business practices, TA, that we began looking into. We realized that a lot of our providers who were applying, because this expansion was a very large project for them, they had concerns about their sustainability as they added on new classrooms, added on new staff, especially if they were making a very large size expansion. So we invested in some additional business practices TA from a separate organization to try it out. We also looked at how we could invest in bringing other business practice trainings to the state, and really turned what we saw as a concern for our capacity building grants into an opportunity to work with our partners across the statewide system to address a concern that was larger than just our individual applicants for this grant. So identifying that as a need for the state to invest in business practice skills for all of our providers. We also looked at if we had a provider that specifically their business practices needed additional training, we could build that into the grant. So we have some of our ministry providers that we built into the grant, them purchasing financial software and training, and required it in their contract in order for them to better understand their individual church's business practices, so that we felt more secure with the sustainability of their project as they expanded, that the church would continue to be around and that the director or the other admin staff would be able to provide it.
So I want to remind everyone again that Learning Spaces is the toddler in all of this. We're only 2 years old, and we are doing still quite a bit of investigating and discovery. And so this really shares with you some of the facility challenges that we've noticed over time. And so what we really learned is that providers work really hard to find spaces that can be licensable. And when they find them, they do the best they can to not only make it inspiring, but to make it functional. But facility development design is just not anything that's typically within their scope. It's far more about the passion and the programming. And so we've learned a lot about that. They don't have within their savings the ability to do repairs, and a lot of them lease, and they have really egregious leasing agreements that are slanted far more to the owner than them. And so when repairs need to be made, they don't have the capacity in their finances to do it. And several times what they do is they use friends or other relationships to make the repairs, which again, a lot of times is not licensed contractors who are registered with our state. And so we found also that as they were doing the best with what they could, they really were not able to connect the quality of the programming that they were providing with the dignity of the space that they wanted to have. So best practices in terms of how you organize your classroom of the space connected to your philosophy about how you wanted to integrate your program or the curriculum you were using. Other things connected to how maybe they didn't really understand aesthetics in terms of best practices. Like so many of our providers were having bright, bold colors in classrooms with infants. And then sometimes it was just buckets of things that, duct tape on the floor, brown spots on the top of the ceiling. And so a lot of what we started off doing with the facility challenges were educating, attempting to do what we could do to preserve slots for children, not necessarily grow them. We really wanted to match quality programming in the classroom with quality facilities from the time that they enter the building and to the time they enter the classroom, thinking of it almost like a home, that, you want each room of your home to be beautiful, magical, and functional based on the use of that. The next thing as we continue to do the program is we learned a lot of lessons. And so we've been doing it for now, as I said, 2 years. And each year we do about 10 providers. And so we're kind of at 22-ish now in terms of the support. And so we, even as a team, had to level set what if they are, we have a 5-star system. And so to be eligible for this program, you have to be at least a 3-star, which takes a lot of work for providers. But a 3-star in terms of your programmatic quality might, for us, look like a 2 or 1-star in terms of facility quality. So your license and your focus on health and safety, but not necessarily on facility architecture or how the design of that could really help support the programming. And so we learned quite a few additional lessons. And we had to make a lot of changes. So we met with providers, and we selected the ones who we thought were the most vocal and the ones who I really had to do a lot of negotiating with when they applied for a playground, but I had to go in and have conversations with them when their roof had all these spots on it or there was other damages structurally. And so that feedback from them was that you really have not done the best job in explaining what facility quality means. What are you talking about? So you also need to do more training in reference to that and help ground us in what that means and how we can match facility quality to our programmatic quality. So in that box that talks about the new process is that we changed it last year to do a couple of things. We now have a cohort model where we have about 5 to 10 participants of like providers. And this program is also designed for center providers and family providers. And so we, over a course typically of 2 hours, we have a lunch and learn where based on the topic we go over those things, we teach them those things, and then our real estate services department spends time with them, helping them to develop a kind of a prioritization document that helps them understand. So in 3 months, this would be what should be leveraged to complete in then 6 months and 12 months. And then from that plan, where we kind of guide them but also let them have their voice is from that 3-month section, based on their budget, select what they think optimizes their program for the children and families that they serve. And we're continuing to learn and to grow. The other thing that we discovered was that we asked providers in the middle of all the other things that they're doing to connect with contractors and gain scopes of work. And we were saying, well, why is this taking so long? Well, we also learned that that's typically not anything they do. Contact people who are licensed and contracted with the state to ask them to come and evaluate their space and give them quotes. And so we also then added on additional training about how you do that. Not to be concerned nearly as much about initially the cost, but the quality of the service, the guarantee that they're going to give you. Do you connect with them? Because so many people who are working in design, specifically our architects, focus a lot on schools. Designing an early childhood facility is completely different than how you design a school. And so our organization is looking and seeking at how we forge ahead with developing partners, particularly young architects and entrepreneurs, who can really be invested in early childhood so that our community providers have more partners to help them with that design. So where we are now in the process is really teaching them about indoor environmental quality, is how we help better explain facility quality. And on this slide, it really just tells you all about what it looks like. So imagine when you are, our weather in Michigan finally has changed. But imagine when you're at work and you're super hot. It's hard for you to function. It's hard for you to focus. It's the same for children. If they're too cold or too hot, it limits their ability to learn, develop, and enjoy the space. Colors, I talked about that a little bit. Best practice is about more soft tones and sometimes having a darker accent. Daylight, we already know natural light is the best light, not only in terms of the vitamins, but just think about how you can enhance your curriculum with being able to have the children have exposure with what's going on outside and inside. And also, I'm not going to go through all of them. The last one I want to talk about is noise. So having classrooms that optimize aesthetics and the auditory system in terms of how you can hear from classroom to classroom can really impede or accelerate development and learning. And we talk a lot about our children, but we know the teachers are doing the most work. And so it's important for them to feel comfortable but also supported in that environment to be able to teach children in the way that helps optimize their learning.
Monica, there's a question in the chat box around whether IFF has grant dollars and the source of those grant dollars, or are your programs entirely funded by loans? Do you want to take that question before we keep moving?
If you want me to, I sure can. So, So there is a slide that's coming that talks about who funds our grants, but I can answer specifically the questions about loans because we get that quite a bit. So we do have 3 partners in philanthropy who help support this, and I'll share a little bit later about how it's grown. But this is totally separate from our loans. You do not have to have a loan with us to get the grant. That's totally separate. Now, I can tell you what has started happening, though, is that because our program, we've learned to increase the amount of the investment, some providers, like we redo one classroom, say, well, now these children have the beauty of this classroom. I want the other children to have it. How do I do that? Well, you know grant dollars only go so far. So then sometimes people come to us, so it ends up being a byproduct, or we connect them with other micro-lenders who might be a better fit. But to really be a candidate or a grantee, it has nothing to do with having to accept a loan or to apply for our loan product.
Great. Great. Thank you, Monica. That's a great segue to our next activity. So for the next the next section of our discussion, we're really going to talk about a landscape of supports and where supply building sort of fits in a landscape, and talk a lot about collaboration, including all of our collaborations with philanthropy that supported these initiatives. But we wanted to encourage you to participate a little bit and to talk to us about what is going on in your community. So using the chat box, if you can identify the number of initiatives in your community that either improve the quality of early learning, provide technical assistance, coaching, professional development, maintain or sustain the quality of early learning, provide tiered add-on, facility upgrading, or expand the supply of quality early learning. So these would be facility startup grants and the like. So what we'd like to see is if you can put in the chat box the word improve and the number of initiatives that are present in your community, the word maintain, the number of initiatives in your community, and then expand and the number of initiatives in your community, so we can get a sense of sort of how rich the landscape of supports in your community is around improving quality, maintaining quality, and expanding quality. So we're going to give you just a couple of minutes to enter those into the chat box. Again, using the words improve, maintain, and expand, and indicating the number of initiatives in your community. So just in kind of looking at what's coming in from the chat box, I think we see what is true of our community as well, which is that most resources and supports are directed to quality improvement, fewer in the maintain and sustain bucket, and really even fewer in the expansion bucket. And you know, sort of the activity of mapping out where the resources are and what their specific purpose is helpful from my perspective for 2 things. One, it really clarifies where gaps are, but it then also helps us really think about alignment and synergy among the supports that currently exist. So you know, we really used developing the landscape model as a way to talk to funders and to get philanthropy and policymakers engaged in the urgency around expansion and facility improvement work. And then also it helped us sort of think about a trajectory for providers and a methodology of prioritizing investments, So this may not be true for every community, but for our community, we really see this trajectory of quality improvement, ensuring that the provider is able to operate at high quality, quality maintenance, can they maintain and sustain that quality over time, and then sort of moving into the quality expansion. And that trajectory is something that we really assess through our assessment of participants, is that they've been able to demonstrate quality, demonstrate maintenance, and that prepares them and readies them for the expansion phase. So again, this is kind of a helpful frame in terms of thinking a little bit about opportunities for collaboration. So as we move into the next portion of our conversation, talking a little bit about collaboration, we are going to show you our landscape for Philadelphia and how it really helped us frame out the need for the Fund for Quality here, and was really helpful in terms of engaging stakeholders and funders around the opportunity to expand. So in Philadelphia, we, like many of your communities, really do have very robust quality improvement initiatives. We have grants and incentives tied to our QRIS. We have a local United Way that had until very recently a significant quality improvement initiative. We are fortunate enough to have significant investment in TEACH for teacher scholarships and ongoing professional development. We have various shared services initiatives and other place-based initiatives that are really focused on improving quality. We have been really increasing investments around the maintenance bucket with tiered add-on from our QRIS, quality maintenance awards through our QRIS. Our city has a facility fund that supports maintenance of high quality, and we have a new fund that supports the sustainability of high quality programs. And then the Fund for Quality is really what was developed to support quality expansion and to really kind of keep those high quality providers expanding, replicating, and in particular, as Bevan talked about, replicating and expanding in communities that are currently underserved or quality deserts in our city. And then, one of the really unique opportunities that's occurred in Philadelphia is the introduction of significant new operating dollars with our Philadelphia Pre-K initiative. And I think this is really an important component when we think about the synergies or the alignments of supply building, is that supply building also needs to sort of come alongside expanded opportunities for operating support. We know that providers are not going to be successful in expanding if there aren't operating dollars and subsidy dollars to support families that sit in those newly created seats. So, we really were able to create a lot of momentum in our community around the desire, the willingness to expand, because firstly we have the dollars to support folks in expanding through the Fund for Quality, but then we also had ongoing predictable operating dollars, both in terms of our Philly Pre-K initiative, but we're lucky enough in Pennsylvania to have a governor who has every year, made a significant investment in our state-funded pre-K. So, really seeing those as closely aligned.
Yeah, and I would also mention, so Natalie and I, not only do we do this work in Philadelphia, but we also do it in Washington, D.C. We operate a small little fund there, but we did precisely this landscape analysis as we looked to enter into the D.C. market, specifically to understand what resources were already available, which are very robust. They're also in the process of shifting to a new QRIS system. And so we kind of mapped this out to understand where kind of the lay of the land was. And our work down in D.C. is much more focused in that quality maintenance, improvement and maintenance strategy to help folks prepare as that new QRIS unrolls.
So when we looked at the collaboration around the Early Learning Indiana grants, we came from a starting point that really looked at the fact that we talk about the supply building. This is not something that's new in the early childhood field at all. So in the same way that other groups are looking at how do we build supply within our community, within our region, or within our state, we know that there are areas in all of our communities where there is not enough high-quality childcare. So we try to approach it from a viewpoint of, one, this is going to take everybody, so how do we bring those private and public partnerships together, and how do we position ourselves to be a facilitation point so that we have the trust of the community, the trust of the funders, and that we're able to deliver on the results of being successful in the capacity building efforts. And part of that is being very transparent when we are not successful and being able to translate that into how we've adapted and changed our process in order to be more successful. And then really looking at how are we relying upon the systems that are already in place. So we looked at it and really divided up sections between what Early Learning Indiana could solely be responsible for and what needed to happen through others. So since we were looking at recruiting for grantees across a large physical space of our state, I don't know about you guys, but I do not know all the local providers, even in my own county, much less to be able to know all the providers in the state for who would be good candidates or not. And as we were getting our first applications, we had some people who on paper looked like really great candidates that when we dug into weren't, and decided to shift to go more towards grantee recruitment coming from those statewide systems who knew these providers and could help us identify the ones who maybe wouldn't apply because they didn't think they were a good candidate but actually really were a great candidate for what we were doing. And then for them to be able to offer that ongoing TA. Progressing through the state's QRIS system is a journey, and to be able to have somebody who can be that on-site coach and be able to help you with key points is not exactly our wheelhouse. We can support the people who do that, but we are not the on-site TA for all of these providers. So understanding where we could each bring strengths into this. It also helped that then we were able to be the grantee contract management. So if it came to a point where there was a sticking point in their contract, it was we are the funder and the coaches are your supports. So that could help sometimes with keeping those clear lines. We also realized because we were looking at a large area of our state and we're looking at telling the story behind what's happening, really trying to get more for the advocacy level, is we need to have some media coordination and media engagement. So how can we take the fact that there's a provider in this county who is the first provider who's expanding in this county in how many years, and that they're adding on these seats and what it means very locally, and tie that into the stories around the state so that we could take that message as we look at additional state investment. And then realizing too that although we have many strengths, the additional business TA is definitely not one of ours, and because of the high need for that we're seeing across all of our providers, we need to make certain that providing that TA is something that's going to be sustainable and replicable in Indiana. So we really came to a point where we got to the decision that if that's not us, how can we help bring that in a way that's going to be embedded within the entire state so that those providers can get the supports that they need ongoing.
So earlier I was asked about our partners in learning spaces. And so for the first 2 years, and still ongoing, it was the Kresge Foundation. That was kind of our pilot demonstration learning period where I shared we were focused really on kind of investigating and learning and preserving slots. And so this year we've gained 2 additional philanthropic partners that are helping us expand in scale and scope. And so the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation is helping us with that tri-county spread that I was kind of sharing with you around that mix. And so for us, we're now expanding in 3 additional areas within our community. And then Kellogg, and so Ralph C. Wilson, that one will start in May for our partners in the community. And then Kellogg Foundation also now has joined Learning Spaces, and our projects will then expand, looking again at how we grow slots now, not necessarily as much about preserving. So preserving along with growth, that'll start in July. One of the other things that we're really excited about that Ralph C. Wilson is also doing is we are having an external evaluator look at not only what is the logic model and the theory of change, but is this process, is our format really doing what it's intended to do? are we helping providers better align their programmatic quality with their facility quality? And are there any shifts or changes we need to do to make it be more effective? And then we also have really great state partners. We partner with the Early Child Investment Corporation, who implements our quality rating improvement system across the state. It was already mentioned that sometimes people apply and they may or may not look the best on paper. Sometimes that's just not people's strength. But when you go to visit and spend time with them, you can really connect with their passion, with their desire to do the best for the children and families that they serve. And you can really help determine if this is a provider who's ready for the challenge and the shift of the way that they've been implementing their project to do the work. So a great example is we had a partner who's working with us, and as part of the name of their center is primary colors. So you know what that looks like, right? And so with that being the case and having those colors across their center, it took a lot to have conversations about changing the inside and how they can still have their branding connected to their name. And so that's really sensitive and hard. And having providers who care enough to focus on that has not only been inspiring to our team, but also is really helping us do our work different. So that's another one of our partners, the providers. Also, our state-funded preschool Great Start Readiness Program, we work a lot with the implementers and supporters of that to really learn for the people that they're serving who at least have to be a 3 on our 5-star scale, are there ways that this project can help increase the quality of the services they are providing as well? And so as we're growing and changing in terms of not only our philanthropic partners, we're really growing and changing the program as we go along to better meet the needs of the providers in the community, but also better learn how we do the work and how we might not only impact this little corner of that MIT, but how we figure out how to expand across the state, because absolutely all children deserve to have beautiful, inspiring spaces to learn and grow and develop in.
Thanks, Monica. So now we're going to move on to just talk a little bit about program impact. We're all kind of at varying stages of our programs and still have a lot of work to be done, but we wanted to share some progress to date. First, we just have some nice before and after pictures. So this is a center that's located in a former Jewish Y that had been unoccupied for 5+ years. There were pigeons living in there, actually. So you can imagine the state of what was happening. Due to the long-term vacancy, the provider was actually able to get a very below market rate and actually didn't even pay rent, I think, for maybe the first 12 months of signing the lease. So that was something that we helped her negotiate, but also, created a pretty large project budget where we were not only looking at the quality improvements, obviously, to the classrooms themselves, but had to handle a lot of building envelope issues, including HVAC systems and things like that, which can quickly kind of eat up your budget. As I mentioned earlier, while the focus is on that net slot creation and really the classroom work, we want to ensure that the investment that we are making is sustainable and around and available for children for years to come. So working through those building envelope issues as well as looking at those shared spaces are really important components. So this is one of the classrooms that you'll see. And then this is what one of the bathrooms did look like and now looks like. As we've done this for 4 or 5 years now, really the pain points end up being bathroom renovations and playgrounds. And those, just due to the nature of what they are, running new plumbing, end up having to get kind of permits and things like that. And then being in Philadelphia, access to outdoor space is at a premium, and so trying to configure ways to either convert like kind of side yards into playgrounds, or even looking at rooftop playgrounds, or things that we have to try and work with based on the building stock and things that we have available to us here in Philadelphia. I think the next two photos are from Detroit. Monica?
Yeah, so this is a classroom that we just finished this year, and to tell a little bit about this story, this was a family provider who was working diligently out of her home, and she actually was one of our first 5-star providers in the city of Detroit. And making the leap from being a family provider to a center provider is a big leap, and it takes a lot of support and encouragement, and you have to shift not only your leadership but your management. And so we worked with her to really figure out what her philosophy was and what she wanted to do, and kind of her lens. It's kind of a Waldorf Reggio lens, and so this is one of her 3 classrooms that she has that we developed in partnership with her. And one of the things that's one of her favorite articulated parts is the area that you see to the far right with the lighting that descends down, because it's a focus area where children can focus and go in their own little cove to read or to reflect or things like that. So that's kind of what that picture is of. And as I shared, that this program is also for family providers. So the next picture really focuses on a classroom that we did with a family provider. I haven't seen it shift yet. There it is. And so
Sorry.
That's okay. For this one, what we changed here was she needed a new egress window. And so we weren't finished, but I just kind of wanted to show you some of what happened, because this is not, we don't have the complete one because we were still doing some work. So we gave her a new egress window, and what's still required there, which is there now, are stairs. But she had a really small egress window, and so that's the new window. We also redid her flooring. And so the complete flooring was done for her, along with going up her stairs. The other thing that we did work on with her, but of course, because this is a partially finished picture, we did some more with her lighting, and we changed some of her, the painting there. But I thought this was important because providers have their way of thinking and how they should implement things to really connect with the children. And also, this family provider is a 5-star as well. And these are strong leaders. And so to accept us coming in and saying, you're doing a wonderful job, but there are some things that you can think through and do differently, I think is a big ask. And so for us, learning how to work with them in a way that validates the strengths of who they are and what they're doing, but also let us come in and talk about indoor facility quality and nuances of change that can happen is really important, and that's exactly what happened here.
Great. We just saw a comment in the group chat around the cost related to the quality improvements per program. And so here in Philadelphia, and thank you for the caveat, knowing that all programs vary and all projects vary. I'd say we're about at, for hard cost construction and kind of like the capital improvement piece, we're probably about $10,000 per seat in terms of creation. And then in terms of our technical assistance supports that come up front, in our pilot round, we actually kind of we ended up allocating out dollars based on kind of the size of the project. So a smaller scale project or a renovation or reconfiguration on site would be able to access, I think it was $25,000 for technical assistance and pre-development supports. And then the larger, like expand to new locations, would get around $80,000. We found that we ended up modifying those far too much because every project was so specific. And if you think about it, we do have some repeat kind of grantees that have come in. So upon their initial acceptance into the program, they may need a very robust series of technical assistance. and organizational capacity training. But then by the third project, they're a little bit more on cruise control, and so that TA support can come down. So that's where we're at in Philly. I don't know if Indiana and Detroit wanted to had any figures or general comments or remarks on that.
Sure. For us, just as our participant indicated, it really depends on the type and size. But just to kind of give ranges from implementation of the changes we're making for our family providers, kind of our average investment has been somewhere typically between $15,000 to $20,000 to do the work, whatever it ends up being for them. And then for our center providers, depending on if we're just doing one classroom or it's kind of the roof and the painting, that ranges typically more around $25,000 to $35,000. And then actually what ends up happening is sometimes the more that you dig, the more that you find. And so what we thought the project was, then we end up finding there are additional concerns with the roof, or we keep digging and we find mold, or we need to do an environmental kind of survey of the air quality, things like that. And so, but that's kind of our range. And one of the things we're working on as part of the evaluation is kind of doing exactly what you said, Bevan. Really, if we broke it out per slot or broke it out a little differently in terms of from the amount truly of TA that providers need, which we're finding we have not segmented enough time for that. How much is that and what's the average of that, as well as for the project investment. So next year I'll have much better, more solid numbers, but that's kind of what the range is looking like presently.
And for Indiana, related to that question, I don't know that we have a good number for that, only because a lot of the coaching and TA for the quality improvement is coming from their supports through the local child care resource and referral. But just looking at the funding for those mostly capital improvements and supplies, the ones that were on the lower and the higher range of ours, because we had the range of the $2,000 to about $100,000, both of those bookends were school systems, because either individual schools that only needed small amounts of supplies because their rooms were already structurally made in order to be a kindergarten room, and it was made well enough that it could be easily a pre-K room. And then our larger gifts went towards school systems that are doing multiple sites or doing a full school system-wide addition. So we found that for a lot of our ministry providers, in order to add on a classroom, 1 to 3 classrooms, they were looking about that $25,000 to about $45,000 range. And then we also would have some that were our centers, that were our larger centers, that would hit more of that $50,000 to about $75,000 range. Where we saw more were ones that it was definitely the older buildings, or buildings that were never designed with child care in mind at all. So that's where we had to do a lot more of the investment per child rate when you're looking at the classroom.
Great. So I think just being conscious of time, and since these slides will be available later, in Philadelphia, we're 4 years in. We still have a few more to go, and we're doing some really great stuff.
I can echo that with Indiana. We've capped how we're doing our projects right now, so that's a project summary of our current grantees, but we're seeing a lot of success with it. That's one of my favorite pictures because that's one where the teacher went through training as well as all of the components in the classroom were brought, and there were additions to the windows, and I love that picture. Just kind of sums it all up. What I think is more important, even than just the individual impacts, is the ongoing impact. And through our process, we've now been able to expand partnerships for what we're doing. It was actually announced, a press release went out today in Indiana for an investment by the state into capacity building that went along with legislation passed last year to expand our state-funded pre-K program. So they announced their own capacity building grants today that we were able to come alongside with, and we talk about filling those gaps. The state-funded capacity building grants were not allowed to have construction components to it. So they were looking at the materials and the training for and the education, those kind of components. So we were able to come alongside and use our funds to fill the gap for those who needed additional construction to expand. So every time we're doing these capacity building grants and doing them well, we're creating new opportunities that can be felt within the state.
So along with my peers, I want to be really respectful of time. So you all can read the hopeful outcomes that we're really focusing on, but I guess I just really want to say that we're hoping to continue just to change the landscape in terms of preserving and expanding quality opportunities for children that are definitely in line with the programmatic quality and the facility quality. And we're just hoping to do additionally really great stuff across the state of Michigan.
So we wanted to draw your attention very quickly to really what I believe are policy opportunities for your local communities. Firstly, the Head Start has a facilities report, and I think if you are a community that does not have an established sort of baseline for facility quality, this may be a place to start, either to use to develop your own or to really coalesce and develop consensus in your community around this report. So we'll refer you there. I know many of you have seen the National Academy study on financing. One of the components in the report is it really does lift out facility improvement and facility investment as a core issue in terms of the business model of early learning and ensuring sustainability. So I think it really creates some opportunity in terms of engaging philanthropy and policymakers around the importance of investing in this area. And then the omnibus spending bill, will hopefully be bringing lots of resources into, we expect will bring lots of resources into our community. I will caveat, having used these dollars before for facility, for minor renovations, there is a lot of red tape around using federal dollars for, facility work. And as you've heard, all of our initiatives are primarily philanthropically funded, but there really are some opportunities here, I think, with appropriate planning and addressing some of the considerations of the federal guidelines. So really we'll just put those links there for you all to investigate those further in terms of opportunities for your own community.
And then just some resources that we've all developed as we kind of make our way through our program, and a couple of folks had also mentioned these, particularly the design guides. I mean, our QRIS does a fairly good job of talking about facilities, but it's not necessarily robust, and it certainly doesn't lift up the kind of best practices and ideal kind of facilities that we'd really like to see. And so what we did was in Philadelphia, we created a design guide, of which the baseline is kind of licensing, and then integrates in any of the QRIS standards that are requirements in their facility portions and components. But then we also lifted up some of those best practices around kind of natural light, color schemes, a lot of the things that Monica mentioned as she was discussing. And so that's really the document that we put in front of folks to help them kind of dream of what that means. Another thing that we think has been really helpful is we have a handful of centers that we do think actually really embody what a quality center is. And so for some new awardees, we actually ask that they do a site visit with one of their consultants to go see what some of these folks have done. And I mean, it's not like these ground up construction centers. Like one of them is in our Chinatown, and it's spread out amongst 4 floors in a walk-up building. It's not the ideal of what you would envision of a high-quality center, but they've definitely made it work. And so that's something that we think is really important and useful to our community. I'll let IFF and Indiana jump in on some of their other pieces.
Bevan, I think you did a great job. Our mapping tool, we're new to it. So ours is specific to the last research study we just recently did in Grand Rapids, and it helps identify where the providers are, what their capacity is, what their star level is, things like that. But that's really all I want to highlight, let people have time to ask questions.
And similarly for Indiana, we do have, we realized because we were taking a statewide approach, there may be a need for more care on a countywide level, but how does that break down on a more local community level? So we are working on a mapping project very similar to what happened. We were actually very inspired by Philadelphia's map. I'm a person who loves. So we are looking to get something created that'll be up in our data center that'll really break it down by like the census level so that we're able to dive into that and allow communities to be very strategic about how they invest in order to add on additional high quality care.
And here's just a slide so you can, these are kind of program-specific websites, so feel free to check those out. On each of these you can probably see the design guides as well as some other materials and program details about what we're doing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the build.
Hi, this is Deb Mathias. I'd like to thank the four of you so much for sharing your efforts in system building and dealing with this very important question around facility development. I have a lot of questions, but looking at the time, I'd like to move forward with Jen. If you could take us through the evaluation questions.
Sure. Thanks, Debbie. The webinar series is funded by the Office of Child Care and the Office of Head Start, and they're evaluating the usefulness of each webinar. If you wouldn't mind hanging on just a couple minutes responding, we just have 3 quick evaluation questions, and you can take them right on your screen. We'd really appreciate your feedback. This lets us know whether we're giving you what you need and lets the federal government know whether their funds are being used wisely. So we'll just give you a couple minutes to respond to this one, and then there are 2 more.
And while we're waiting, I'd like to say after these evaluation slides, there are lists of some additional resources. So you'll want to go back to the landing page for this series on finance and look at resources if you've been interested, and I see many of you were interested in the topics we covered today.
And we will be sending everyone a link to that landing pad and the PowerPoint and the recording and the additional resources as soon as we're done with the webinar. So I'm going to move on to the next question. And I'll move on to the final question. Thanks again for joining us today. Thank you for our presenters. And again, you'll get an email following the webinar with a link to the PowerPoint recording and all of the resources. Thanks, everybody.